PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I'm Dave, and in this video I want to talk a little bit about how we transition from one chord to another when we're playing a chord progression. Now there's no right way or wrong way to do this. What I'm just showing you is a way that you can think about doing it. It also serves quite well as an exercise in it's like testing yourself and stretching yourself in terms of your chord vocabulary and coming up with different shapes for the same chord. Because of the way the guitar's tuned, the same chord can be played in lots of different ways at different positions on the fingerboard, different inversions and so on. So there's a bit of an exercise element to this as well. Oh, and guitar of the day today is this Evo Artist from Williams Guitars, the teak top custom guitar that I had built last year. Very, very nice guitar, really enjoying it. Also today I'm playing this. It's a carbon fibre pick that I picked up from Timber Tones recently. Really enjoying this. If you haven't tried carbon fibre picks, do. They're quite interesting. Very, very nice to play. Okay, so let's crack on. I'm going to play a simple chord progression through and we'll talk about the notes in there and how we're playing the chords. I'm going to start off with this, what should be a familiar chord shape, just an open position G major chord. So there we've got a G major chord, so a G, a B and a D, and we've got a G in the bass, so it's a root position G major chord. Next we're going to go to a D major chord. It looks like this. Here we're only playing on the top 5 strings because the bottom string E isn't in the chords of D major. The notes of D major is D, F sharp and A. I do however have an F sharp here at the 2nd fret on the bottom E string. So because there's not much happening in the bass on this chord, I'm bring my thumb over the top of the neck and fret the bottom E string at the 2nd fret. Gives me that F sharp. Using the thumb, much underused fretting hand technique. And that gives me all 6 strings. Play that D major chord. Now because the lowest note in that chord is an F sharp is the 3rd degree of D major, so that's what we've got there is a first inversion D major chord. And the next chord we're going to play is an A major, so we just play a familiar A major chord like this across all 6 strings. Now let's look at that progression again, and particularly pay attention to what's happening on the bottom E string here. Start on a G major, lowest note's a G, go down to a D major, lowest note's F sharp, we'll go to an A major, where the lowest note is an E. So if you think about what's happening in terms of the bass note there, we've got a very nice gradual progression, just G, F sharp, E. So we're going down the diatonic notes of the scale, just leading the bass note down, so it's a nice gentle sort of transition. So looking at the chords involved, we've got a G major in the root position because G is the root and it's the lowest note in the chord. Then we're going to a D major first inversion because the F sharp is the 3rd degree of the chord and it's the lowest note that we're playing. And then we'll go to an A major chord, 2nd inversion. 2nd inversion because the lowest note is an E and E is the 5th degree of A major. Yeah. Very nice gentle movement in the bass notes there. So that kind of leads me on to the next thing I want to talk about, which is voice leading. Voice leading, the idea of this comes from like choral music. Because if you think about the way that the human voice works, we're naturally a monophonic instrument. Naturally we can only sing one note at a time. It's not like a guitar or a keyboard or something where you can play lots of notes together. Human voice, you can sing one note at a time. So what would happen in a choir is you've got a whole bunch of people whose voices will vary. You'll have some people more bass, so naturally sing lower notes. They're like alto, tenor, soprano sort of ranges where people have increasingly higher sort of natural ranges of notes that they can sing. So you've got somebody towards like the bass end of things singing a C, somebody maybe towards the alto sort of range singing an E, and somebody else towards the tenor range singing a G. Put those notes together and what you're hearing is a C, an E and a G. You've got a C major chord. Now if somebody wanted to move from one chord to another, you could move all of those voices, or what you could do is just have one voice move to a different note and then the sum total of all of the notes being sung by all of the voices gives you a different chord. So that's why it's called voice layering, because it kind of comes from choral music. But I'll show you an example on the guitar. Let's just start off with an open position C major 7 chord. And what I'm going to do here is just move one note. I'm going to change the note being sung by one voice, if you like. I'm going to change the note being played on one string. And I'm going to put my first finger down on the first fret on the second string. So that takes me from a C major 7 to a C major. Now what I'm going to do is take my third finger off the third fret on the 5th string, take it down to an A, and the chord I've got now, I've transitioned from C major to an A minor 7. Yeah, so I've started off on C major 7, went up to C, and got an A minor 7. Now I can look for, well, what's another chord that I can move to by only changing the note being played on one string. Well, I can put my ring finger down here at the 2nd fret on the 3rd string, which would give me an A minor. So the progression now goes C major 7, C major, A minor 7, A minor. And this is partly a compositional exercise, but it's also a way of kind of testing yourself on how good your chord vocabulary is and how well you know the layout of the fingerboard and what notes are in what chords and where they occur. Because you can start to look for, well, based upon this A minor chord, where can I move that'll give me another chord. Say here I'm playing in the key of C major, so I need a chord that's diatonic to the key of C major. Well, what I could do is I could raise this E at the 2nd fret on the 4th string up to the F at the 3rd fret on the 4th string. So change my finger in slightly and I end up with this, which is an F major 7 chord. So this gives me quite a nice sound progression now. F major 7. Where can I go from there? Well, how about I bring my little finger down onto the 3rd fret on the top string, add in a G. It's diatonic. What notes have we got there? We've got an F, an A, C, and a G. So that's what you could call that an F major add 9. But the progression goes quite nicely, doesn't it? And from there, where am I going to go? Well, what I'm going to do is just move my 2nd and my 3rd fingers down by a string. So it's a slightly bigger jump this time. Keeping some notes the same, changing a couple of notes in the chord. And I'm basically ending up with a C major chord, but this time, instead of being the one that we played earlier on in the progression, we've got a G as the highest note on the top E string. And if we put those together, we end up with quite a nice sounding chord progression. It's very smooth because there's not a lot of change between one chord and the next. Yes, that's a very nice, gentle chord progression because we're not having big movements between the chords. Now, whether that's the right way to play that chord progression or the wrong way to play that chord progression, it depends on the way that you're playing. Sometimes you might actually want big jumps in your chords because you want to have a huge sense of movement. Other times you might want something really, really gentle. Now, somewhere where you hear this used a lot, and I know there's one or two people watch this channel who are organists. You hear this a lot in church music. Not so much the music that's played during the service, but often the stuff that's played when people are entering the church. They just want a bit of like background music going on, and the organist will just play a chord, and they'll just change one note, and you'll get this very gentle movement from one chord to the other. They could pretty much stop anytime that they like because they're not like playing a particularly complex piece where you're kind of following the progression through, but it's just nice gentle movement from one chord to the other. And this is where you need to know good chord vocabulary and understand not just like the basic major chords and minor chords and so on, but understanding like seventh chords and extensions and add notes that you can add on and think about how they relate to the key that you're playing in. Okay, one last thing I want to talk about is perhaps using non-diatonic chords. So all the examples we've played so far, they've been in a key, and we've only used notes in those chords that belong to the parent key. So they've all been diatonic. What I'm going to do now is look at a chord progression. Just going to play it as straight chords to begin with, and then talk about things we can do based upon the idea of just gentle transitions from one chord to another. So I'm going to start off with this E minor 7 chord, go down to a D minor 7 chord, down to a G7 chord, and finish on a C major 7 chord. Nice, inoffensive diatonic chord progression. Nothing particularly exciting, but it gets the job done. So let's think about some things we can do just to make that a little bit more interesting. What we can do is we'll start on that E minor 7 chord, and the D minor 7 chord is basically the same shape, it's just a couple of frets lower. Why not, instead of just moving from one chord to the next, just take the whole shape down through that in between position, so playing an E flat minor 7 chord, or D sharp minor 7 chord, but don't dwell on it, just pass through. Yeah, so that's not a particularly consonant sounding chord. There's some notes that kind of jump out that don't fit into the key. But because we're not dwelling on it, those dissonant notes kind of do the job because they want to go on somewhere else. So the natural way is to move to a chord which is diatonic. So back to something consonant. So that gives us our first two chords in the progression. Now, the progression, we're going to go from a D minor 7 to a G dominant 7th. Here I'm going to do a little trick of chord substitution. Anywhere you can play a dominant 7 chord, you can play a dominant 7th chord with the root note that's a flat 5th above or below. So instead of playing a G dominant 7 chord, I could play a D flat dominant 7th chord. So if you think about the transition from a D minor 7 chord to a D flat dominant 7 chord, yeah, that's a much smoother transition to go from to than it is to go from to. And then I could take that dominant 7 chord down to C major 7, so I've got a nice smooth chord progression. I'm wondering if perhaps I'm dwelling just a little bit too long on that substituted chord, on that D flat dominant 7th. So what I might do is say perhaps play that for just half a bar and then play half a bar of the G7 chord that was in the original progression. So let's try that, starting on the D minor 7 chord and then going through the D flat dominant 7th to the G dominant 7th. It sounds a little bit smoother. So what I'm going to do now is play that whole progression through twice. I'll play through the first time using the purely diatonic chords that we started with, then play through a second time using those additional chords that we put in to kind of smooth the whole thing. Okay, so there's different ways you could phrase that and time that. That's just one example. Really, this is just kind of show you the idea and then encourage you to go away, experiment on your own, come up with your own chord progressions. You know, try moving an idea that we've looked at and try doing it in a different key, because you might find, because of the way the guitar's tuned, when you do it in a different key, you can't change the same note of the chord shape because you end up with something non-diatonic. The fingerings just aren't going to work, and that kind of leads you down a different path. So it's not always the right way to do a chord progression. It's just one way where you want a nice smooth progression. The idea of just changing one note out of a chord, or looking at passing chords, so the jump between one chord and the next is kind of smoothed out because you've got some other notes in between. Just an idea, experiment. It's all about creativity and kind of stretching yourself, and hopefully this kind of validates the idea. You think, well, why do I need to learn theory? You know, I can pick up a chord dictionary and just learn chord shapes and know which chord shapes belong to each key. This is one of the reasons that you learn the music theory behind the chords. It's so when you understand the notes that are involved, you understand how they relate to each other and how you can mess around with different shapes and come up with different chords and understand how that relates to the key that you're playing in. Okay, I hope you found that useful. If you did, please click like down there. If you really enjoyed it and you want to see other videos that I post onto the channel, then please click subscribe, which is also down there. If you want to ask me a question or suggest a subject for a future video, then if you go here, send your question in, I'll try and get around to answering it as soon as I can. It's more reliable to send your question in that way than it is to leave a comment below the video, because YouTube is not particularly good at letting me know when people leave comments, so sometimes questions go unseen. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video next time. Bye for now.